welcome to the Doomloop Dispatch, the podcast about the worst parts of the San Francisco Bay Area. My name's Kevin L. Jones, and I'm here to tell you about what's going on in the Bay, including the facts the media conveniently leaves out. I'm starting this podcast because I can't take it anymore. I've lived in the Bay Area for over 20 years, and I've watched the area go from an artist-friendly, somewhat leftist enclave to an emerging right-wing development on the level of Galt's Gulch. This week, there was a special election and some seriously right-wing propositions passed in San Francisco. One requires drug tests for people receiving public assistance, and another weakens oversight of the San Francisco Police Department while also expanding its powers, which, if you know anything about the scandal-ridden SFPD, you know that's a bad idea. Personally, I feel a lot of the right-wing shift in famously left-wing San Francisco is the fault of the media. I've been a journalist for 2 decades now, and it's not the job I fell in love with. When I started, it was about reporting the unbiased truth. Nowadays, the media is just a constant consent manufacturing machine, pushing any narrative the business elite wants out there. Right now, it's no secret that a small group of the Bay Area's richest people are using their wealth to aggressively influence politics. Their names pop up in story after story. People like Gary Tan, Michael Schellenberger, Michael Moritz, Ron Conway, Jason Calacanis, David Sachs, and many more. They all want to change San Francisco and the surrounding areas to benefit them at the expense of what the majority of residents want. Any politician with leftist bona fides that wins their election is bound to face a recall, and popular propositions meant to decrease the amount of the incarcerated are attacked relentlessly in the news and social media. Worst of all, they're succeeding. We saw it last week with those awful propositions, but it started back in 2022 when San Francisco District Attorney Jesse Boudin was recalled just for being progressive and going after cops, and he was blamed for a crime problem that wasn't his. And then they recalled the school board, or at least 3 school board members, the most leftist on the board. Why? Well, they had various reasons for each one, but the big part is that the school board wouldn't open the schools until the pandemic was over. They wanted to wait for vaccines, thereby protecting teachers and students, but because it affected business as usual, they became targets. Now they're going after Pamela Price, the respected civil rights lawyer who became Alameda County's district attorney. Again, these wealthy urban colonizers don't care what the majority of residents want. They're so blatantly selfish, they started Price's recall campaign the same year she started as DA. Thankfully, people are waking up and fighting back. Groups like Our Revolution, SF Berniecrats, San Francisco Education Alliance, and the Phoenix Project are all doing good work, but they're up against a media landscape that's working against them. I'm here to counteract that. Not only do I want to make sure the truth is out there about the Bay Area, I want everyone to know what's going on with local media, which does not work for the people. So now let's get into some headlines. First, let's talk about last week's election in San Francisco. Basically, the only good things that passed are Prop A, which raises $300 million for affordable housing, and Prop D, which updates the city's ethics laws to curb corruption in City Hall. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then you need to look up Mohammed Nuru. Every other prop sucks, in my opinion. Thankfully, Prop B, which increased police staffing, failed because the last thing San Francisco needs is more overpaid cops. They are the highest paid local law enforcement officers in the country, and they have the worst stats in terms of solving crime. They are a waste of money. Prop C was about lifting taxes on converting office buildings into residential buildings, which I couldn't give a crap about. It barely passed anyways. Prop G is a nothing burger. It's a non-binding measure calling on the school district to offer algebra classes to 8th graders, which the district has already agreed to do. It was pushed by Autumn Lujan and Siva Raj, the 2 fake San Francisco residents who led the 2022 school board recall, which they started 1 month after moving to San Francisco. Prop F, the prop requiring drug tests for recipients of public assistance, is important, but there's a good chance it would be thrown out by the courts. Florida passed something similar back in 2012, and it was struck down. They can only test if there's suspicion of drug use. Also, the ACLU found that the program didn't save the state any money in the first place. Now, Prop E is scary to me. It removes a lot of the powers from the San Francisco Police Commission, which was set up because the department had so many scandals. Basically, anything the commission wants to do to get the force in line now has to be approved by the police chief. The commission's only real power now is to pick the chief. The prop also lets officers chase possible suspects in cars, which endangers local residents. And it lifts requirements for officers on reporting use of force, which means cops can pull a gun on you for any reason and they don't have to tell anyone about it. In future episodes, I'll go more into depth into the scandals of the SFPD because there's a lot. What I will do is talk about how the Electronic Frontier Foundation fought the cops for the past month over an illegal search warrant and gag order. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, or EFF, defended Indy Bay, which is a community-sourced local news outlet. Back in January, someone published a story on Indy Bay where they claimed credit for smashing windows at the San Francisco Police Credit Union. According to the EFF, that same day, the police both issued a search warrant and a gag order for Indy Bay, demanding the site hand over any text messages and whatever unpublished information that would help reveal the author of the story, and then didn't let them talk about it. The EFF jumped in and determined right away that everything the police was doing was illegal. And after they took the force to court, the cops gave up. Still, I want to highlight this story because it perfectly exemplifies what San Francisco cops actually prioritize: themselves. Why was Boudin recalled? Crime problems? No, crime was down. It was the San Francisco Police Union ticked at Boudin for daring to arrest and charge cops with murder when they killed people without justifiable reasons. A problem the SFPD has had for a while now. Why did they go after Indy Bay like they did? Because someone broke windows at their bank. Do they go after other vandals as hard? No, they don't. Hence the terrible crime statistics. Now, let's talk about an opinion piece from venture capitalist Lee Edwards in the SF Standard that ran just days after the election. Edwards insists that the election last week was not a right-wing takeover, but a win for progressives. Oh, wow, who knew? Oh, wait, he's full of crap. How do I know? Well, because one of the first quote-unquote progressives he talks about is Trevor Chandler, who was voted onto San Francisco's Democratic County Central Committee last week and is currently running to be supervisor for District 9. No matter what Chandler claims, he is not a progressive. I mean, it's clear in his platform where he pushes for the return of the war on drugs and villainizes the school board. But most importantly, he used to work for APAC, one of the most evil organizations in this country. Our tax dollars are being sent to a country committing genocide thanks to APAC. And guess what? Chandler refuses to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. Shocking, huh? Edwards is just another fascist techie who wants to take over San Francisco. Surprisingly, his name doesn't show up in the Phoenix papers, a document published last month that traces a lot of the dark money coming into the city to influence politics. For my interview today, I'm going to speak to two members of the Phoenix Project, Julia Pitta and Jeremy Mack, who put the papers together and are continuing to follow the dark money. Well, thank you so much for doing this. First off, why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
I'm Julie Pitta. I'm president of the Phoenix Project.
Cool. And yeah, Jeremy Mack, executive director.
Awesome. And can you guys both give a little background about yourselves and how you got involved with the project?
Certainly. I am someone who lives out in the Richmond district, and we've seen an influx of dark money in our neighborhood elections. And that's what got me interested. It was kind of a long road, but eventually I was able to find other people who were equally concerned, and that led me to Jeremy and the Phoenix.
Awesome.
Yeah. No, go for sure.
I was just going to say awesome.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, for myself, I've kind of been involved with political stuff and other policy research background, coming from Portland, Maine. Moved out to San Francisco about 3 years ago for graduate school at University of San Francisco. Studied urban and public affairs, focusing on housing policy and community development, but also kind of got plugged into the political world as well. And yeah, was just very concerned with the trend of big money pushing conservative agendas, particularly kind of like gentrification related agendas in the city. Post-grad started looking around to connect with people who are doing that work, was connected to Julie and you know, many other things, but here we are.
Yeah, great. And how long did it take you to put together the Phoenix Papers?
Well, that was kind of a, months long process. There was the original research and tracking down this money through campaign filings and IRS filings. This is not easy information to come by. So that was where quite a lot of the heavy lifting went in. So yeah, it's, less than a year, but several months, and many of us worked on it. Many of us worked on it as volunteers because we were so concerned by this.
Yeah, I mean, it's concerning to me too. I've been following, and it's been insane. Like, I remember back in 2020, just the recall ads and how, I mean, they took over Hulu. I was shocked how much money was being invested for things like school board campaigns, which, I think somebody had noted that, like, before, like, at most somebody might pay like 50,000 for running for a school board campaign, and it was like so much more money invested.
Yes, it's really astonishing.
But I understand that, San Francisco, the rich have always had influence, when Joe Biafra ran for mayor in 78, he talked about it actually being more of a race between Feinstein and Quentin Kopp. And Quentin Kopp had, the real estate lobby backing him. Now, how is it different today? What do you think is going on? Why is it so much more money today?
Well, these people have so much more money. This is global money. This is money that's being made from tricky technologies like crypto. This is huge amounts of money being made on global markets. The people who are funding some of these campaigns, both for candidates and initiatives, are billionaires. We're not talking about multimillionaires anymore. We're in a whole new category of folks and spending. So that's part of it. The other difference is how organized they are. They are coming together, with a few notable exceptions, but they're largely coming together for a single agenda.
And what do you think is that agenda?
Jeremy, would you like to take that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll put in one more point here about like what's different about these groups, and to say that, like, 1990s, 2000s, more traditionally, how to win political favor, how to win political favor is like, maybe a wealthier individual, someone like Ron Conway, for example, would donate a large amount of money to an individual candidate. That's, Ron Conway's contributions, for example, to London Breed. A lot of money over a period of time, endorsing her, helping, fund her campaign, getting her into office. And then you can turn around and then say, hey, when he wants political favor, he can call her up and she's, open to receiving the call and talking with him through what, how to turn that around. So it's an investment in that way in an individual. What we're seeing right now is a significant shift where, instead of it being about wealthy individuals backing individual candidates, you're seeing 501c4, 501c3 organizations that are popping up that are becoming the hubs themselves of the political organizing. And these organizations receiving receiving massive amounts of donation from these billionaire networks, and then turning around and creating a slate of candidates, creating their own political coterie. And so all of a sudden you have candidates who are not so much, in a bunch of individuals, but rather like handpicked and hand selected based off of how they align with the, be it Grow SF, for example, with their messaging, with the issues that they believe in and that they want to see passed. And that's a significant change, because then when these people get into office, they are incredibly connected and have allegiance towards these nonprofits, these, political essentially actives, 501c4s, political action committees. They run multiple, they wear multiple hats at the same time. But they're more beholden kind of to that group than they are necessarily to like any one individual donor, or even, you could say then to the constituents that they're supposed to be serving. So I think that's one of the more symbolic shifts that we've seen in these last like 10 years, 5 to 10 years.
There's a real specificity to the agenda. It's not just we want a mayor or a supervisor who is pro-business. They want very particular things. In our neighborhood, we saw a lot of advertising trying to place pressure on Connie Chan, our supervisor, who is head of the budget committee. They wanted very specific things in that budget.
Yeah, and I know Gary Tan has said in interviews that he wants to turn San Francisco into Tokyo, which, I mean, what's wrong with San Francisco? I'm sorry, but do you have any clue about their motivations, and is it real estate value?
Well, that certainly is one of it. I think if you wanted to put a general name to their motivations, you would say profit. They want to protect their money. They want to increase their money. And for them, given how wealthy they are, the amount of money they're spending on candidates and issues is a small and a very smart investment.
Interesting. So what about San Francisco threatens their profits? Is it just the regulations, and they're all kind of involved in real estate development, hence the desire to remove all regulations around development?
Well, Jeremy, you have some very specific information on the real estate end of this.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of different factors at play. I think that, from my framing, from a community development perspective, it seems very clear like a gentrification agenda to a degree, in terms of, I mean, real estate absolutely being a critical part of this, and sort of one of the parts of glue that kind of brings a lot of these different big billionaire funders together, between Orbendorf and Kilroy and Shorenstein. But then also, Larson and Moritz, and, each one of these individuals has their own kind of particular take to a degree, but the overarching confluence that we're seeing is this coming together of tech, real estate, and venture capitalism, all into the fold here. And so, yeah, I mean, there's the aspect of this is increasing the real estate values, absolutely. But like with the big agenda being, right, like Julie mentioned, profit, being able to make an investment into politicians that are going to help increase their bottom line. So that both means like undoing policies that have passed that are, been very popular. Like there's a number of more quote unquote, progressive legislators, supervisors who have gotten to office. The DCCC turned to being, mostly filled with folks that are, labeled progressive, as well as also, more progressive referendums or what have you that have passed over the last 5 years. And across the board, these, more progressive policies include, wealth taxes, taxes on billionaires, taxes on empty homes, taxes on real estate transfers, things that the public generally in San Francisco agrees. It's like, yeah, like, the billionaires should be paying their fair share. Absolutely. And they're only getting more and more wealthy during the pandemic, at the same time that everyone else is getting, having their pockets hurt. And the billionaires don't like that. They don't want to see their taxes increase. They don't want to see their cost of doing business increase. So this is an investment not only in, maybe undoing some very particular policies at the outset, and maybe also, building popularity to be able to pass more issues that will help their bottom line on the immediate level. But then also it's a long-term strategy of getting folks in there who will help overturn past policies that have already been put into place, that have enacted, these extra levels of taxation or regulations that they see as being a threat to their own bottom line.
Yeah, and sorry, go on.
I'm sorry. It's an agenda of selfishness. They've made huge amounts of money in this city. They've benefited from the two major universities in the area and the graduates who come out of those universities. They've benefited from people who are willing to take a chance on some new business models, and yet they don't want to pay for the privilege of being in a town like this one that has been good to them.
Yes, totally. Yeah, especially that there's so much in there too. Like, yeah, the universities working with real estate companies too. Talking about Cal working with Blackstone, and at least that's what's going on in Berkeley. But also too talking about, or even like just a threat to status quo, such as Boudin being recalled, Chesa Boudin being recalled. Why? Well, because he was willing to charge cops with murder. So, but
and willing to look into
wage
theft, white collar crimes in a way that DA Jenkins, she really got her rise in talking about all the petty level crimes. It's been like, we're not hitting petty level crimes hard enough. We're not hitting drug dealers hard enough. We're not hitting folks who are smashing, grabbing hard enough. That's the culture war that they're kind of riding a wave into in a way that Boudin is like, yes, like these, there are problems that are happening that we need good policy in order to push back against. But even more than that, yeah, he wasn't willing to look past the white collar crimes and the exactly wage theft crimes that some other folks are willing to look away from or turn the other way. I mean, I know, going back to Ed Lee with calling the district attorney to tell them not to look into Airbnb and Lyft and Uber violations, because they were, there's a bunch of laws that they were violating without, having drivers without taxi licenses and people running hotels out of their homes without hotel licenses. Like, all that's illegal. But it was like, oh, well, who's going to prosecute it? Well, if you tell people to look the other way, then then they will, depending on who's aligned with who and where the money's coming from, et cetera. So those are some of the dynamics there at play.
Yep, and that's why they like that top-down power structure too, which they keep. Oh, it's so much more efficient if you have one leader in charge of everything, one authority. You mentioned Obendorf, and he's and you talk about it too in the Phoenix papers. He is a Republican donor, straight up. But then it's contradictory to the narrative that's being pushed, especially on social media, but also too, on billionaire-owned papers like the SF Standard, that no, it's actually progressives winning. Like last week, Lee Edwards said, it's progressives who won. What are you talking about? Now, we know this isn't true, especially, one of the people he claimed was a progressive is Trevor Chandler, former APAC lobbyist, who wants to sweep the homeless away, wants to bring back the drug war, all these things that are not progressive. Now, here's my question. Do you see this working? Does this narrative work? Especially when we have all this data and all this info showing how it's contradictory.
It will, unless we fight back.
Yeah. Well, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. No, I think your podcasts in its very name kind of hits at it pretty effectively in saying that there's a doom loop narrative. There's this like inevitable doom kind of that's permeating the media and how San Francisco is being discussed. And it's not just happening in San Francisco, it's happening in New York as well. It's happening in Chicago as well. It's this fear mongering that becomes what I would think of as being like the right wing's culture war.
It is. It's an attack on cities. It's an attack on blue cities in particular.
Right. And to say that as well, like, especially I would say coming off of like the Black Lives Matter movement, the defund the police movement, there were a lot of these big progressive wins that happened in 2020 and 2021 and 2022. Politicians being held accountable, kind of a rise in younger voters, more folks of color voting. Like, there was and that like brought in a lot more progressive change. It pushed out a lot of the old guard nationwide, and cities like New York, like San Francisco, especially, and Oakland as well. But they're finding ways to say, oh, well, and this is going back to what I would think of as the gentrification agenda here, where it's like going back to saying, oh, well, we're not here to gentrify San Francisco. We're here to solve the housing crisis. We're not here to gentrify San Francisco. We're here to solve homelessness. We're here to create cleaner streets. And so it's a strategic reframe, and they're able to do this so effectively as well because they've spent so much money on polling. They know what polls well. They know what tugs at people's heartstrings. And that's why I think of it as a culture war, because it's the same thing that the Republicans are doing. They're figuring out, like, what are the big issues that will make people get really up in arms? They don't have to be true. They don't have to be based in reality, but they're going to make people really angry, really upset, really emotional, tug at something, insecurities, fear. And they're using, and we see Grow SF consistently, and Neighbors for Better SF, Together SF, both in their statements and in the canvas that they're supporting, and the referendums that they're putting on the ballot, like hitting right at people's insecurities, hitting right at people's fears. And that's how you win a culture war. And I think that the left now on the other end, the folks who are being, coming up against this right-wing money that are being attacked by these groups, they're having to then now, play defensive and say, okay, well, how are they going to try to then reframe the issues? How are they going to try to, move this forward? We know that the numbers might be on their side, but the narrative is quickly slipping away from them.
Yes, and there's you bring up two. I mean, the whole narrative of just kind of driving interaction and anger. Like, for one, the retail crime theft or the retail theft crime sprees and stuff, which we now know was fake and kind of pushed by retail lobbyists. And then also too, just this last election, the algebra for 8th graders.
Yeah.
It's just completely advisory. The school board already says they're going to do it. And yet, oh no, we, come out and do this. It's going to make you a huge difference. When it doesn't. It's clearly to engage.
They found an opportunity. This is my belief, with the pandemic. The pandemic created a lot of unease among people. It also, we already had a social safety net that was frayed. It made things worse. So what they're doing is they've used that unease and they're just ratcheting up people's emotional responses to some of the pain that they're seeing on the streets. It's a hard thing to combat sometimes with facts. People want to believe what they feel. But I think that is the only route towards arresting this.
Yep. And they found their demographics. They've been really effective at figuring out who's their base, and how can they appeal to them directly and build off of. So one group that they, work really hard on recruiting and getting advertisements to and getting to show up to events is this under 35-year-old, especially around 30-year-old tech worker that's relatively new to the city, that doesn't really necessarily have much of a context on what's going on, isn't necessarily maybe a Democrat but not necessarily progressive, and be able to kind of bring them bring them into the fold of like, okay, here's what the big issues are in the city. Here's how here's the housing problem. Here's government dysfunction. And we're gonna, and as such, we want you to vote for us and our issues. And so they kind of like, they've really centered on tech workers, which have also like not traditionally been a very mobilized base in San Francisco politics. They've been generally kind of like, oh, like transplants, not engaged, not politically active. So that's like one that they've activated. The second one is parents, like parents as like as a voter block. And what they found, it's been pretty effective, is like, oh, you can have parents who maybe individually as two individuals or even as a pair are fairly progressive people, would pretty much down the ballot vote for more progressive candidates as far as it goes. But when it comes to their kids, they're willing to, go hard right. When it comes to, if it's about supporting the schools, if it's about supporting their kids' well-being, education, it's kind of like whatever it takes. And so they're kind of, you see that with the algebra referendum, where it's like, it's completely a symbolic gesture, but is able to hit up these parental insecurities and get them to, fall into their messaging.
Yeah. During the pandemic, what I saw happen is there was this anxiety as parents were trying to, balance their own need to continue to work, and they had their children at home and they wanted them back in school, but they wanted them back in schools where they would not be safe. It was quite irrational. I mean, they were agitating for this before there was a vaccine available. They were agitating for this even after there was a vaccine available, but the buildings weren't well ventilated. This is just a way in which, these emotional appeals can actually work. I don't think they work long term, but for a short period of time, they can be quite effective.
Yeah, and hopefully people see that, oh, okay, well, we recalled those board members, for one reason or another. I mean, Allison Collins, the campaign against her was ridiculous. And also the whole, how they made the renaming the schools during the pandemic a huge deal, which was just so dumb and clearly a cultural war thing. But yeah, hopefully they see now, especially with all the money that these new, that the school district is losing, and now they might like close down schools. Hopefully they realize like, oh, actually, maybe this investment and going with this side actually did not work out.
Right. And change is a really effective thing to run on. People are like, oh, like, we are like, are you fed up? Well, many people are fed up for many, many reasons. Most San Franciscans can say that they're fed up with a variety of things. So then to be able to position yourself as the change maker is popular. I mean, I think, that's what both Obama did very well in running on a change platform, and Reagan did very well running on a change platform. It's like, oh, you're fed up with the system. You're fed up with the way things are heading in, let's make a big clean slate.
Yeah. But then in the case of like the local police, that's honestly what they're doing, is protecting the status quo. They're not going to get more change if they just continue what they're doing, which is what they're protecting.
Well, what's interesting is out here in District 1 where I live, the change candidate was Mayor London Breed's first chief of staff, Marjan Philahauer. And she's running a campaign that really that strikes at this fear-mongering agenda. Are you fed up? Do you want more police on the streets? That kind of thing.
Yeah. And it's, of course, it's not going to help, So now, because it's dark money and you've discussed this, there's a lot of donors that I thought I would see on there and didn't. A big one being like Michael Shvu, who, has tons invested. I mean, I think like, it's like the Transamerica building's like $1 billion alone, over $1 billion alone. Do you think there's a lot more donors out there that you couldn't find any trace of?
I believe so. Yeah, we're finding new donors every day. I mean, we're continuing to do this work.
Oh, that's great to hear. I mean, in the sense you're finding them.
Right, and we'll be notifying people.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. Yeah, no, it's and I'm trying to pull up the numbers so I have it directly in front of you here, but I think it's like of the $33 million that that have been raised by Grow SF, Together SF, Neighbors for a Better San Francisco since 2020. Is it 17 million of those dollars is dark money?
I believe
is that
so.
Is that
I
the
believe
number?
that was the number. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like, what we're able to report on is what we know. We have the tip of the iceberg, or we have like the top chunk, and we're able to say, okay, here are the big donors to these groups that we're aware of, and based off of who these donors are, this is what we think their agenda is. Based off of what they're giving, not only on the local level, but also on the state level and the national level. Like it seems like here's what they're going for. And particular points to looking at Oberndorf being like one of the largest charter school advocates in the country, taking over from Betsy DeVos from when on the charter school, like National Charter School related association. And it's like, okay, and then here's Kilroy, and he's a real estate background, and here's his angle, and this is what he invests in. So like you can kind of start to build out, okay, if this is what if this is what they put their money into, and this is what their agenda really looks like, then this is what we would then imagine what they are, what the big picture of these organizations that they're investing in, like this is also their vision. So like they're putting money into Grow SF, they're putting money into Neighbors for a Better San Francisco in order to enact the agendas that they care about and help make them into reality. That's the investment part of this. This is not just doing it because out of goodwill or because of ideology or tights or something like that. So there's a reasoning behind it all. But then in terms of what we don't know, it's still right. $17 million is a lot of money that is not being revealed. And for all we know, it could be, folks who are much more, MAGA, far right extreme than the folks we've been able to find. And I'll say on that point as well, San Francisco has the most billionaires per capita of any city in the country. And the disproportionate amount of those folks are right wing and conservative leaning, and don't necessarily want their names being talked about in podcasts and up on public, up on the newspapers.
I'm still shocked David Sachs lives here. I don't get it. Like he's like so anti San Francisco. I just don't get it. But then at that same time, it does seem to, now maybe I'm wrong. Is there a lot of money coming from outside the city to influence? We know Oberndorf doesn't live here. But how much is coming from the outside to kind of push these things, especially in that whole like going after the left-wing mecca that is San Francisco, and to kind of use it as a way, as a tool or a bludgeon against progressive ideas. See, look, progressive ideas didn't work here, why would they work anywhere else?
As they all, the most notable ones seem to have a toehold in San Francisco, but most of them seem to be at best part-time residents. They have properties in many places, as you would imagine, with people of that class.
Yeah,
and it's a great research question. It's one that we haven't put too much thought into specifically, of like, okay, like how many, like what percentage of these folks specifically are like not San Francisco residents, and break it down in that way. Definitely, it seems like from what I've been hearing around, like from like, for example, the other more statewide initiatives that have been looking to take on the real estate industry, especially, it seems like there's a lot of money that comes from New York, from real estate invested Wall Street corporations. I mean, you mentioned BlackRock earlier, now largest landlord in the United States. So
or Blackstone, BlackRock.
Oh, sorry, not Black. Sorry,
Yeah,
I'm thinking of Blackstone. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Yes. Thank you for catching that. And so it's important to so we know that the money's coming in. We haven't been able to break that down specifically, but definitely at play.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, love it. And then how much money do you think is going into kind of the internet trolls? And I mean, I don't know how you could connect it, but it really does seem like there's something coordinated and something must be paid for.
I've suspected that. I've been on Twitter for a while now, and I've suspected that during Chase's recall, there was this whole group of internet trolls, you'd look up their bios and you'd see that they had very few followers, that they had been recent additions. And they were using pictures of Asian male models. And they were all named some deviation of the word or the name Wenzel. It got to be very, very strange. A journalist I know, Gil Duran, was trying to track all these folks during the recall. So yeah, there's a lot of money, and I think there's probably plenty of money for social media campaigns, and social media trolls.
Yeah, and it's like I think people need to realize that more. That I mean, so many, especially if they're so active and so pushy about one subject, you have to consider maybe they're getting a salary for this.
Well, in fact, what's very interesting is I joined Nextdoor, and I saw a number of people who were paid members of campaigns who jumped onto Nextdoor. I knew them because I was involved on the other side on these campaigns, and I would report them, and some would get pulled down and many would not. But it got really bad during the last D1 supervisors race, where probably a half a dozen people who were paid campaign operatives were jumping on there, pushing for their candidate.
Wow, that's insane.
Yeah, and there's definitely also, when I was in grad school, one of my one of my classmates was doing research into bots, Twitter bots, and impacts of those, and he was looking specifically at in San Francisco and was finding that there was just like, when looking at especially like more conservative bots that you'd see like popping up consistently, like it wouldn't take very long for him to realize, and be able to start to pull apart like who's a real person and who's a bot. And it would be like, their like Twitter handle would be like San Francisco fan 87, and it'd be like a kind of like a generic picture of the Giants or like the Pier, and it wouldn't and you kind of like start to dig in and be like, okay, this isn't a real, like you look at their likes and stuff like that and be like, oh wait, this is just a auto generated being. This isn't a real person behind this thing. And they're consistently on every single one of like whatever issue that they're into, they're consistently posting about it. So it's like, they're like, I don't have the numbers, I don't have the data to be able to back it up, but there's definitely like, and as someone who's not a deep Twitter person, I wasn't really deeply connected in Twitter before. I've been definitely since, working with this organization, pulled much more into the X arena. And I found it pretty shocking. The level of just like trolling and, just for me suspected bot narrative pushing, and particularly like on like right-wing issues, that I really wasn't expecting it to be at that level.
Now, here's a question. After the Phoenix Papers came out, how many local news organizations interviewed about that?
Very, not many. We're kind of on the radar of a handful of organizations. We'd already been on the Chronicle's radar with our launch. That was, we had a piece in the Chronicle before the papers were released. The Standard's been really interested in what we've been doing, and kind of there's a reporter from them that's been like, checking in with me every so often, be like, hey, asking me certain questions and stuff, but just very curious. But yeah, I mean, we had an interview on KPFA last week, before the election, and then kind of a post-mortem after the election. And then 48 Hills, of course, is very active, and we also had good communication with Mission Local and the UK Guardian, that have both been following. And Mission Local, I think, has done a really great job in following the money and in getting into these issues. So that's kind of been all the groups that we've been really in discussion with. But yeah, I mean, there not too much major press beyond that. Truly.
And I bring that up because I've been in the Bay Area news world for over 15, almost 20 years now. And I've worked at KTVU, KQED, KPIX, and it's been shocking from my point of view how biased a lot of the reporting has been going on, how they really have been, especially the TV stations, which I'm not too surprised by, especially because of their how much they need to work with like local police and local businesses to kind of keep going. But it's still like just the biased narratives have been so insane. And I think this is another example of it, of like, we'll just say that's not news. We'll just say that's not a big deal, even though clearly a takeover by billionaires basically bullying people with money to get what they want is definitely news.
Yeah. Do you have any perspective on that? Like news-oriented perspective around
my feeling is
conservative takeover?
The coverage has been really, really light for the Phoenix Project. I've been kind of surprised, especially given how much coverage people like Mike Moritz and Gary Tan, and it seems like every time they open their mouths, there's reporters there ready to take their pearls of wisdom. So I've been somewhat surprised. I don't know whether they're waiting to see if we've got staying power. I don't know. It's hard for me to quite understand. Some of this obviously has to do with newsrooms having been decimated over, it's been a little light. I mean, part of it obviously has to do with how decimated traditional newsrooms are, but that doesn't explain all of it. We're coming up with a different narrative, and they're, I think, still trying to figure out what to do with us.
Sorry, go on.
No, go for it, please.
I was just gonna say, I've been on the other side of it, and I've seen the bias work. Like, do you remember when Vice reported on how the driverless cars cameras, the footage was being used for police?
Yes. Yeah.
So I was at KPIX at the time, and I hit up the news desk. Now, if you know anything about television stations, a lot of what's filtered to the reporters and editors goes through the news desk, who basically are the ones listening to police scanners, taking phone calls, etc. And so when I tell them, hey, we should get confirmation or at least a statement from the San Francisco police about this, and they're like, nah, it doesn't seem like a story to me. Nah. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to do it on my own. And I did it. I got confirmed. Like, they sent me a statement about, yes, we do this. It's not that big of a deal.
Right.
I mean, they try to downplay it, but they confirmed it. KPIX refused to do the story. They just no, it's not a story. No. And you know what they did instead? They did a story about police recruitment in Livermore or someplace like that.
Oh God, no, please. Yeah, one of my first jobs was at Bay City News, so we fed into the radio and TV stations. Yeah.
Oh man, Bay City! It's like the ultimate starter spot for local journalists.
It's a crazy job. After a couple months, they made me the swing shift news editor. I mean, was like 20 years old. It was crazy.
Oh yeah, I'm not surprised because they didn't want to pay anybody. But
No,
then
they didn't. They ended up. There was when I was there. There was a big movement to organize the newsroom because people got treated so badly. I would be there until midnight, and then they'd put me at the 6 a.m. shift. I mean, the next day.
brutal.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
brutal
yeah.
stuff.
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
And I have been trying to, like, and talking with folks, especially like media folks, about like the purpose of the Phoenix Project. It's like we're really trying to bring together like research with analysis and organizing, or with the mind towards organizing, and that's something that a traditional news station or newsroom can't do. You can't. You could do, maybe you could do the research, maybe you could do some of the analysis, but we're trying to, by bringing all three of these pieces together, we're not just trying to make a statement, but also trying to help push, help be part of the push against it.
Yeah, I don't know why I keep going away, but I'll just keep this going.
We're down to our last couple minutes. Do you have any final questions for us?
Oh, I guess no, then you know what I'll do? I'll just ask this one last one. Do you think the techies will win?
I hope not. I don't. I'm a terrible prognosticator. What do you think, Jeremy?
It's a good question. Depends on what you mean by win. But I'm someone that likes to hang on words. So I think that, like, right now, these groups, which I don't think actually speak for all tech workers, but I think do a good job at like consolidating the money. The power of like someone like Gary Tan is that not only is he, influential in his own little personal sphere, but also, people are actually actively trying to court his favor because he's the, director of the most important tech startup incubator in the world. And so, there's a lot of like, shoulder rubbing and like wanting to be on, if he says jump, you say how high, I think that's the dynamic
He's
that's kind of
considered
happening.
a kingmaker in
Right.
Silicon Valley at this point. What gives me some hope is getting people like this to work and play well with each other is a very difficult thing. And we're looking at already with the mayor's race that people are starting to split away from each other.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and to wrap up the answer here, it's to say that like there's a dynamic with Grow SF, Together SF, Neighbors for a Better San Francisco, et cetera, Abundant SF. This is a bunch of tentacles connected to these AstroTurf organizations. They just keep on popping up, and especially around election time. But they have an element of like new kids on the block energy. People are like, oh, just like, I'm willing to trust them because I don't know anything about them, but I know that they're not the establishment politicians. I know that they're not the people apparently who got us into this mess. So maybe they can provide us an answer or some other direction away from where we are right now because we're fed up. It's an easy thing to play into. That sheen only lasts so long. You're only an outsider for so long until you are, and especially if they are successful, as they have been this March election, and start becoming the insider, then it's like, well, you don't really, when their policies, only continue to hurt and gentrify San Francisco and hurt middle class and regular San Franciscans, and people get increasingly fed up with their status quo, there's going to be a reshift the other direction. And I think that, as we see oftentimes with the oscillations of politics, I think the same thing is going to play out for them. They might have their ups right now, but it's not going to last.
Yeah, I think they kind of benefited from the majority of the artist community and a lot of the old San Francisco residents being pushed out in the 10s too. And I think now, but I think the people still coming here are still smart and, on the left side of the political spectrum. So hopefully, especially let's see how Aaron Peskin does for the mayor as a mayoral candidate.
Yeah, it's a matter of time before they're kind of branded, before people are like, oh yeah, like I know about Gary Tan. Right now people don't know about him. Like a lot of people who are in that circle do. And, as someone who's in that world, it's like, of course, you know who that is. It's like most regular people don't know who that is. Most regular people don't know who Michael Moritz is. But, once they continue to get their way and exert influence, and they will, and they'll have a bad taste in their mouth for them.
Yeah. And you could see that too with how like that Edwards essay tried to pass off these people as being progressive when, just a few minutes of research on the internet, like, no way. How, the guy went for APAC. How is that guy progressive?
Definitely check out if you haven't seen it already, the Mission Local article about like that shows the breakdown between endorsements by the Republican Party, endorsements by the Democratic Party, and endorsements by Grow SF and Together SF and the mayor, like for this March election. And it shows how Grow SF and Together SF consistently are much more closely aligned with the Republican Party's endorsements than they are with the Democratic Party's endorsements. Oh. And so it's like, the cat's going to be out of the bag pretty soon. It's just a matter of people getting hip to it.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I wish I could have gotten into more of how they're actually now attacking you, Julie, after this report came out. I think that's really unfair.
Conversation.
Yeah. I do that another time. But, honestly, it's not unexpected. And I mean, you've been a journalist for a long time. You kind of expect that you're going to take some shots, right? When you do something or write something people don't like.
Yeah. Especially if it's against the status quo,
Right.
So, especially if you're doing something right.
yeah, totally. Well, please, give up your URL, and when do we expect the second volume of the Phoenix papers to come out?
We're working on it right now. We're going to a meeting to talk about it right after this. So they're kind of in process. And our goal is sometime this next month.
Wonderful. So it's what? phoenixprojectnow.com. If you're interested in downloading the Phoenix papers, which I highly recommend. It's a very simple breakdown, gives you everything you need to know, but it will also open your eyes to how crazy this takeover is and how big it is.
Great. Yeah, follow us as well on social media. I think it's Phoenix Proj now is our Twitter handle, PROJ. So Phoenix PROJ now. Follow us on Instagram, follow us on X, other great ways to be, hearing our updates and seeing where our, other groups that are using this information and taking it with it and running with it, and building up this narrative. So really important work leading up to the November election, especially.
Thank you so much, Kevin.
Yeah. And thank you for all the hard work you do, you guys, and have a great week.
You too.
As well.
Bye-bye.
Great to meet you.
And that's it for this episode of Doomloop Dispatch. Thanks so much for spending some time with us. I want to say thank you to all our guests, Jeremy Mack and Julie Pitta from the Phoenix Project. Again, please make sure to check out phoenixprojectnow.com. All of our sources for this episode will be on our YouTube page under the episode. So if you have any more questions and want to do your own deep dive, go for it. Come to our YouTube page and check it out. I'll probably get up some other pages as well. I'm setting up all of our social medias, but currently we're on Twitter at Doomloop Disp at twitter.com. And you can also email me for questions, comments, etc. at doomloopdispatch@gmail.com. Thanks again, and stay vigilant, because we will win.